Is the American dream truly out of reach for most people? This is a question that I've been asked a lot. It's something I'm seeing a lot in YouTube. For those who are not familiar with the American dream, I recommend checking out a video that I did a few years ago comparing the American dream to the European to Chinese dream. Basically, and the definition I'm going to use for this reaction video to how money works is the idea that no matter what your background is, whether cultural or socioeconomic status, if you get an education and work hard, you can achieve at least a middle class lifestyle, if not better than that. The American dream, I think, is often conflated for just that everybody should automatically get that. Whereas I think that the original meaning of that is more of the opportunity set. Are the opportunities still there? And by that definition, the American dream isn't dead. But let's see what how money works thinks is, because I think he might have a different opinion about me on this and might make some excellent points. And without further ado, let's get started with the reaction.
How much would you need to buy the house, the 2 cars, the family, and a basic vacation every year? I know it's not going to blow your mind to find out that these supposedly vital ingredients to a good life have gotten kind of expensive, but it has reached a tipping point. The American dream is not dead, so much as it's an extreme luxury in many parts of the country that can now cost as much as $10 million to afford.
Alright, so $10 million, that's probably assuming the compounding of all years and years of that. You don't have to make that all in 1 year. And on my video I did about what it takes to be rich, I said the definition of being rich is 20 million net worth liquid, which only 0.6% of Americans qualify by that definition. So saying you have to be halfway to being able to retire right now to have the American dream, I'm not buying it. But based on this guy's math, I'm assuming the house you're buying is about $1 to $2 million. You've got 2 kids that you have to pay to raise them, each $250,000. And then college tuition, which I would say is about $50,000 a piece. Let's assume one goes to private, one goes to public, so the average of the two, $50,000 each per year. Times that by 4, times that by 2, $400,000. And then if you buy a car, 2 cars, that's probably about $100,000, like for 2 decent new cars, like an Acura or like a higher end baseline non-luxury car or lower end Mercedes you can get for about that much. So you have $100,000 for the cars, $1 million, $2 million for the house. I'm just gonna round these up higher. $400,000 for the college, and $500,000 for raising the kids. So that's $4 million right there. And then add, let's just say, one $10,000 vacation every year for 20 years. That's another $200,000. That gets you at $4.2 million. And that's not even discounting per present value, because you don't have to pay this all now. Like, you have to pay that college 18 years from now, assuming your kid is born today. And let's add another $100,000 for wedding related costs. So you're at $4.3 million. And that $4.3 million over a career is not that much higher than the cumulative value of a education. And I'm not factoring retirement. So if you want to retire at that same standard of living, let's just say you need $100,000 a year at 5% returns. So that would be about another $2 million right there. So you're at 6.4. So that is high. If you count the retirement factors, yeah, that is out of reach for a lot of people. But that's far less than the 10 million this guy's claiming. I mean, I think maybe he's saying everybody wants to live in penthouses in Manhattan or San Francisco or something, because even with me using relatively generous assumptions, it's still a middle-class lifestyle. And this before discounting, and if you discount it, a present value of, say, I don't know, 5 to 6%, it becomes a much lower number, which I'll show on this screen when I have time to calculate it after recording this. It's not as bad as he portrays. That's the bottom line.
Partners living alone without children is on the rise.
Well, that's just a market reaction to wages being too low, and or the housing supply being too low. I mean, if you look at birth rates and housing costs, they're very strongly correlated. I've talked about this in previous videos. And if you have a society that says, oh, we want growth and economic growth and population growth, but on one hand, and then on the other hand, you say, we're going to have a cap on the supply of housing and necessities for people to live in these cities that you want to grow, those are contradictory goals. You can't have population growth without supplying the housing for that population to grow. This is a free market response to the combination of real wages being too low for given the excess supply of labor, particularly skilled labor, relative to the amount of jobs that demand skilled labor. And meanwhile, restricting the supply of housing so that the cost of living is now even more elevated because you have more people competing for the same amount of space to live in. Like, you can't just say, oh, we're going to have a set capacity of people who can live in the city, which is effectively what you're saying by limiting housing supply, and then at the same time complain that people aren't having children.
And some places have it even worse than us. According to data from the US Fed and the US Census Bureau,
it's not quite the same around the world. People have different expectations and dreams based on their country's social contract. In Europe, they just want to know that the government is going to take care of them even if they don't succeed enough in their career and they have a minimum baseline living standard guaranteed, which I don't really think has changed that much in Europe, to be quite honest. And in some other countries, if the deal is in more authoritarian regimes, you don't really question the government's power as long as your living standards of your children are better than your parents. And in some countries, that's starting to break. But for the most part, those hold as long as the regime has decent enough economic policy. And when they don't, then that's how you see regime changes and revolutions in authoritarian states. So I think he's incorrect to say that it's all the same standard. I think this is more of an Anglosphere thing.
Bureau compiled in the Case-Shiller Index, the average cost of a home in the U.S. is now more than 7.6 times median combined household incomes. That's
very high. Like, if you look at the historical average in the U.S., it's about 3 to 4 times. And if you look at even more expensive areas such as California or New York City, it's 4.5 to 5.5 times. And in those markets such as San Francisco, Orange County, California, Los Angeles, New York, it's like 9 to 10 times now, which quite frankly is absurd. And it means that your mortgage payment in many cities would be double the same amount for a rent in the same type of building or house. So like, it literally makes sense in some of these more expensive metropolitan areas to rent a house and invest the savings into a stock portfolio. Then it will make sense to ever buy a house until these numbers correct. The market's either pricing in a lot more inflation, and it means wages are going to catch up to these housing prices and fix the multiple that way, or that the housing prices are ultimately going to correct once we have a demographic transition and the boomers pass on.
Significantly higher than it was in the lead up to the global financial crisis, an economic meltdown enabled by housing speculation. If you think that's bad, spare a thought for the UK, which has lower wages but similarly priced homes, or Canadians, who, according to data compiled by Financial Samurai, have on average 10% less disposable income but live in houses 75% more expensive.
Yeah, I mean, see my video on the economic future of Canada for that. But yeah, Canada's just trying to build a whole economic model on just being landlords for newer migrants who they can rent out their properties to and not really produce any actual real value. Like, all of the entire Canadian economy is either resource extraction, taxation, or real estate development, and none of those things actually create real value add They are rent seeking from literally the land on the ground or the minerals under it. And that's why I think Canada is going to have some major problems in the long run.
New mortgage rates are also at the highest point they have been since the year 2000, when home prices were only 4 times household income. The average person, even if they have a full-time working partner, cannot reasonably afford to purchase an average home at current prices with current interest rates without paying more than half of their before-tax income in interest. That's before principal repayments on the loan, and before income tax. In reality, the average bank wouldn't even write this mortgage because it would be financially irresponsible. Now, housing is expensive. You don't need me to tell you that, but
Maybe it's just not a good idea to buy a house right now, just given the condition of the housing market. And we have a culture, and especially in Anglosphere countries, that's conditioned that housing goes up no matter what. So, and you can just, your appreciation will take care of it on the back end. So there's no real reason to ever consider not investing in a house. But again, also, I think a lot of it is just inflation. And as I mentioned in my video, the running the treadmill, the higher housing costs are not being properly calculated into CPI. So whatever the CPI number is actually much lower. So the problem is not housing necessarily. It's the fact that wages are not keeping up with inflation. And I talked about this in a video called Housing Isn't Expensive, You're Just Poor. And if you look at housing and say priced in gold, it tells a much different story. And I have a chart I'll just post right here that shows that housing really hasn't moved that much versus the price of an ounce of gold. Like the amount of ounces of gold it costs to buy a nice house back in 2000 is similar to the amount in terms of ounces of gold it costs to buy a house today. So the real difference is just that wages are falling. And we can get into why wages are falling, but let's first figure out what he says in the rest of this video. I'm doing this a little differently than previously, that I'm reacting without watching it entirely first.
every other part of the American dream has somehow become even more expensive. The cost of a car, a basic college degree, insurance, and medical care have all outpaced inflation, which is also at decade highs.
Or maybe they're not, those are inflation. Or maybe this is the fact that the inflation calculation is just wrong. Like everything that people, and they're overweighting things that people buy on a discretionary basis, like vacations or electronics or clothes, whereas the stuff that people have to buy every day or every week to survive is being underweighted in the CPI and is just not being calculated properly for a variety of reasons, such as the flawed metric of owner's equivalent rent, which is basically when the government interviews homeowners saying, how much would you rent your house today if you were not living in it and were renting it out, is not as accurate as more real-time data. So I think that has a lot to do with this as well.
The only way to keep up with these prices is to be benefiting from them. Every chart related to your personal finances is up and to the left. But investment asset classes are up even more. The average house is now earning more than the average American in capital gains that are taxed more favorably, and the stock market continues to break new records. Adjusted for inflation, household incomes have increased by 20% since 2005, but the NASDAQ is up by 340%. People who have had time to amass assets...
Well, the NASDAQ is not a representative index. It's half of it is big technology companies, and even overall has a heavy sector weight towards biotech and information technology. If you use the S&P, that's more accurate. It's still up a lot, not nearly as much as the NASDAQ. And if you have nominal GDP going up, which is real GDP plus inflation, that's a realistic expectations for corporate earnings. So if people's wages are not going up faster than nominal GDP, it makes sense that the stock market would go up faster than wages.
Others, so much that it has become a status symbol even though it's technically free. And that's having children. According to data from the Bureau of Labor...
That is correct. Like the new real status symbol for somebody, say 45 and under, is having 4 or more kids, because of just the cost of raising each one has gone up so much that, especially on the being able to have a house big enough to keep them all, that the few families that can, it's the best kind of humble brag you can about your wealth and status without directly saying it.
Statistics, the inflation-adjusted cost of raising a child has increased by more than 50% since 2000, and some of the biggest expenses are now 250% of what they were 24 years ago. This data was collected for husband and wife families, so it averages out the cost of one partner needing to take time off work to look after children. The reason this is happening is because less people are having children. Young working professionals earn too much to be eligible for most child subsidies, but too little to really afford to raise children. The only people that can afford to have children are very wealthy people who don't care about spending thousands of dollars a year on the best preschools and paraphernalia for their child.
That's not necessarily true. If it's very expensive to raise a kid in New York City or San Francisco because the school systems are so bad, you have to put them in $30,000+ a year private schools. But if you live in the right city, you can still raise kids at a reasonable cost. I have plenty of friends who had to leave, say, more wealthy cities to do it, but they have done it, and they have large families and one-income households. The other thing is that if the cost of childcare is $2,000 a month per child, then it might make sense from an economic perspective to switch to a one-income household based on the after-tax income of the person's job compared to how much they would have to spend on childcare and other costs. And then there's also the other thing that could be managed for this is living closer to extended family, so relatives can help with a lot of the child rearing responsibilities versus just handing it off to some third-party daycare.
This means that only expensive, high-end services catering to the children of affluent families can count on a reliable stream of business, so the expensive options are the only ones that last in the market. There is also a large...
Or the fact that a lot of the baseline quality of education and the overall level of public safety in many neighborhoods is deteriorated to the point that if you want your child to be raised a certain level of quality, you have to put them in the high-end affluent tier of child services. Otherwise, your kid cannot compete either academically or in terms of avoid serious trauma or other negative side effects of growing up in a more rougher part of town.
But just as everything you need to live a normal life is becoming prohibitively expensive for normal people, previously luxurious alternatives are becoming much cheaper.
I think he's going to pitch the digital nomad lifestyle, which is great for somebody in their 20s, but I don't really think just from a happiness level that people who spend their entire lives just living place to place without ever having a family of their own or developing a community on the net are going to be happier in the long run.
Remote work has allowed a lot of young people to get a job or sometimes multiple jobs at the same time and then do them from anywhere in the world.
That's first of all not straightforward. Most remote jobs and companies that hire people to work remotely, especially due to tax purposes, have a requirement to live either in the country that they're hiring them for or the same time zone or sometimes even the same state. Like I know here in California, when a major Fortune 500 company often hires remote workers, they usually have a geographic restrictions for tax and compliance purposes that they have to live in the same state that their home, quote unquote, home office is. So if your home office is in Los Angeles, you need to live within the state of California to comply with tax laws. So on the corporate level. And there are some other, and also why would a business hire you to work remotely and live in a different time zone and if they can just hire somebody in the country of your time zone, say like the Philippines or in Europe or wherever you are, and hire a local for a lot less money. Like I did a video about this in San Francisco's next Detroit, where the average European GDP per capita is just over half of an American. It's about 41,000 in the EU versus 75,000 in the US. Canadian wages are less than 2/3 that of Americans. So if I was going to hire remotely as a business owner, and I know business owners who have done this very intelligently, instead of hiring an American for him to do it on vacation while he's in South America or in Europe or Asia or some other part of the continental US, if I'm going to hire somebody to work in a different time zone, why don't I just hire people in Montreal or Toronto or Vancouver in Canada? Or why don't I hire people from England? They have the same language skills as the person here. They have a similar enough quality of education. Why would I pay the extra amount for some, such as a Los Angeles or San Francisco level wage, for somebody just to travel around and arbitrage that at a cheaper locale? It doesn't make any sense from a business owner's perspective to do that when there's a lot more opportunities to hire locally in these places. And especially with how big the wage gap is now between, say, the UK, Canada, Australia, and continental Europe to the US, there's a arbitrage there for the employer, and they're going to cut Mr. Digital Nomad out of that. If you're an entrepreneur, it's different. And you're really good at digital marketing and can build a client base without knowing people personally or in your local community, then this lifestyle is viable. But I think he's overstating how easy it is.
Traveling the world full-time or living in a cheap but exotic destination was the reserve of the jet-set class just a few years ago. But now almost anybody can do it while saving more money than they can get in a major city. These so-called digital nomads have gone from a small niche group to a major component of the workforce in less than a decade. A survey conducted by the workforce intelligence firm MBO Partners and published by the Harvard Business Review found that 17.3 million American workers now describe themselves as digital nomads.
That's about a little less than 10%, or a little more, than 10% of the American population. Is about 150 million people in the workforce right now. And again, a lot of these digital nomads are, especially during the next recession that I think is going to come within the next year or so, are going to be the first people to get cut when budgets are cut. Because for the very same reasons I mentioned earlier in this video, they are taking advantage of an arb that came out during COVID, and capitalism is very efficient at eliminating these type of arbs. So enjoy it while you can, digital nomads.
Some people in remote work heavy fields like technology, data, or media creation have even created forums about doing multiple full-time jobs at the same time to make several full-time incomes. Living in a different...
And what a surprise. The biggest proportion of layoffs, especially among those making more than, say, $100,000 a year, happen to be in tech and media since 2022. And I expect that to continue, especially as the wage arb from locals in the same region becomes more aware. And also the economics of people making money as professional YouTubers and a lot of other media jobs, it's a very Pareto distribution. So I don't think, again, digital nomad life is not as easy as accessible as how Money Works is portraying it to be.
The country has also become a lot easier. Some popular centers with budget-conscious digital nomads are safer, cleaner, and have better amenities than American cities that are unaffordable. Some countries are so welcoming to young remote workers that they have even started offering digital nomad visas to simplify the legal and tax considerations of working in another country.
Yeah, Portugal is the most notable and it's probably the best one of these in terms of digital nomad visas, because it is within the EU, so there's advantage for that. Weather is really good there, and it's a developed nation, so that could be the place to go if you really do have this kind of flexibility compared to some of the other popular digital nomad destinations.
Because of a phenomenon known as doomspending. If you have worked hard in school, landed a good job, worked for 10 years, and are no closer to owning a home of your own, it's reasonable to want to see some kind of reward for all of your hard work. If you can't afford a sensible purchase to treat yourself, you could at least buy something that makes it look like you have some kind of financial stability in your life. It's not logical, but these companies don't make billions of dollars.
Yeah, it's basically financial nihilism except for consumers. Like instead of betting it all on sports betting or crypto, you buy some status symbol to make it to convince people superficially that you're not poor. And yeah, it's illogical, but yeah, this is kind of the other way that you express financial nihilism. I may call it consumer nihilism.
Selling $2,000 shoes by appealing to logic. Doom spending is all a part of a bigger trend of people just giving up. In countries like China, where competition for housing and other essentials is even worse than here in America, there is a lying down movement. Young people are...
It's called lying flat, and I talked about this with Chris on a video, My Economic Future of China. But I think the fundamental problem for all of these is that the cost of just getting by is relatively low, but the cost of truly thriving is too high. And when that gap gets too wide, people give up. Like, a lot of people think, oh, you have too much social welfare, people get lazy and quit working hard, like you've seen in Europe. Yeah, that's true. But on the other side, if life gets too hard, people give up. Like, the self-esteem people had a point in the sense that if life seems hopeless, that's not going to be very motivational. They maybe took it to an extreme in the sense that, oh, we got to make life super easy and comfortable, but that also, at the tails of this, if life's too easy, people get lazy and give up. If life is too hard, people get lazy and give up because they think, oh, I don't ever have a chance of making it. And that's what this doom spending and financial nihilism is a byproduct of, is that basically the gap between just surviving, especially as social welfare safety nets get stronger, or the political will to make them get stronger, has become more popular throughout the United States and other places. But the cost of truly thriving due to government restrictions on housing supply and other variables has made the gap too wide, and people see the math like, look, if I have a normal W-2 type job, I'm never going to get there. I might as well just quit. And it's happening all over the developed world. It's happening in China, it's happening in Japan, and Korea, and in Europe, and in the United States, and Canada, and Australia too. And it's sad.
Are not going to work or school and are lying flat all day playing video games and relaxing. The trend was such a threat to the country that the government banned the term on all social media. And that might be the most important part of the dying American dream. What happens when everybody gives up on it? The American dream only works if most people believe in it to keep the system.
The problem happens when a society just gives up on it is your society stagnates and your economy no longer grows, at least in real terms. And you have more inflation because people tolerate more inefficiency because there's no reason to really get ahead. Your hard work doesn't pay off. Like, you look at Brazil is a good example of this. And I did a video, Economic Future of Brazil, where they tolerate a lot more like inefficiency and laid back lifestyle because there's no real payoff because of a historically rigid class system and a lot of government red tape and relatively low wages. There's really no incentive to put in your 100% or your 110%, take it to the next level. And if that becomes the case in developed economies, like you see with Italy before they joined the euro, the lira consistently devalued a lot, had a lot of inflation, because Italy was the first country to where the connection between hard work and success started to break. The social safety net was too strong to find a high of a floor, but the domestic economic opportunity to get ahead due to a lot of regulatory issues to protecting older workers and more established businesses over competition took away a lot of the upside of working hard, and so the society stagnated. This is going to spread as class systems become more rigid and people perceive that it's rigged against them. And that is how basically an economy slowly dies until the supply-demand imbalance resets to a way that living costs become more affordable, or the economic incentives are realigned that you can get ahead in a way that's easy enough that enough people can do it to inspire the American dream or inspire working hard. And like, if I had to run a political campaign, and I thought making a separate video about this, which I probably will, the idea is we need to make hard work pay off again. That's the problem. Our society is incentivized in a way to not reward productive behavior. And that's also going to lead to just lower quality services because like people are just going to do things slower, whether it's workers on a job. They know that they're not going to, a promotion doesn't really mean anything to standard of living, so they'll work slower, which means the amount of time to get something done is going to increase, which means the amount of wages spent to do that thing is going to increase, even if you don't increase the actual salary level. And so therefore that's inflation, and that creates more costs. Like the slowing down and the demotivation is a big driver for inflation. And then the other factor here, which how many works fail to talk about, is maybe the reason why a lot of the American dream is priced out for a large chunk of the middle income distribution is because a lot of middle class people today don't have the same amount of human capital as they did in previous generations. There actually is a declining quality of human capital, which I've talked about in previous research that I've done, and I think I might do another video entirely explaining this because it's a much longer topic. But the typical college graduate today simply is not on a raw IQ basis or in terms of level of academic accomplishment not as strong as they were 20 years ago or 30 years ago. And because of that, their output and their work is probably lower. And especially in an era with AI and a lot of digital technology that automates a lot of work, a lot of modern corporate jobs are really just sending emails to people, and that don't require as much actual hard skills because technology does a lot of the hard skills. And so as a result, they are more replaceable, and therefore they don't need to pay them as much. And the salaries haven't gone down because you've had enough inflation and to cover up the fact that real productivity is declining. So you get paid the same, but because of a higher price level, it doesn't go as far. That's effectively a wage cut. And wages are one of the byproducts of its supply and demand and productivity. So if you produce less in terms of real value per hour, you're going to get paid less in real value per hour. And the example of this, look at wages priced in gold and silver. And it's a very different chart than the housing one I showed you earlier. There is actual math. Their productivity levels have declined. You have IQs a lot of places and adjusted for every socioeconomic demographic variable you possibly can in the developed world have declined. There is a real issue here, and on the causes of why, if it's something you guys want me to do, I can make another video, but it's the one thing that is really missing here. I think the main bottom line here is that he's off about his projection for the costs, and I think this guy who make this video might be a digital nomad. I don't really know the personal background of how money works, and I think he's overestimating the ease of such a lifestyle and how it's not going to get arbed away in the next recession. And also, he's also not really addressing the issue of the declining quality of human capital. Thank you for watching.